Now, listeners, I did promise that I would have a very special guest tonight, and he has joined us. He is here in the studio. Um, Welcome to Takoma Radio, Martin Graff.
It's nice to be here.
Thank you so much for coming. Listeners, I have to give a little backstory before we begin our interview. Martin was supposed to join me back in December of 2021, but there's this little thing that's been going on in our world, a pandemic, and things have been moved around with schedules, and we've been very cautious here at Tacoma Radio about having guests in the studio. And so here it is June, and you're here. Finally, welcome, welcome.
Yeah, the stars have aligned.
Finally. So Martin Graff is an artist, author, musician, extreme chin beard enthusiast, and he crafts poetic vignettes with matching art on every topic from the stigma of liking Scrapple to the meaning of life in a series called The Face Zone, Surreal Daydreams to Trip Your Imagination. Marty, I actually, that is how I know you, because I used to be on the Takoma Park Arts and Humanities Commission.
I recall that.
And you had an exhibit in the auditorium there, and it was of the Face Zone pieces.
Yeah.
So I was intrigued, and I made sure to stay in touch with you, especially when I found out that you combine your visual art with music. Do you want to tell listeners a little bit about who you are and your music and what projects you're involved in?
Yeah, sure. Well, as you said, I'm Martin Graff. It's very nice to meet everybody out there. And I would call myself a performance artist because I work in three media. I kind of do three things at once. I write, I draw, I compose piano, and I deliver it all in this live multimedia act that, as you said, is called The Face Zone, Surreal Daydreams to Trip Your Imagination. And if people come to that show, it's basically, the stage, you'll see a big movie screen and then a microphone and a piano. And for most of the show, I do these spoken word vignettes on a variety of topics as the artwork that I illustrate that goes with each of those poems or stories is projected next to me on a very large screen. And the reason it's called the Face Zone is because each of the pieces begins with a projected image of a face that I illustrate. It could be an animal, a human, alien, abstract, but it's designed to trigger your imagination and act as a catalyst for the material that comes after that. And then well, and I should say, like you said, that the topics vary so greatly. I mean, I've got pieces about love, loss, entropy, social justice, tech addiction, penmanship, cats, near-death experiences, pretty much everything under the sun. In fact, I have a piece about the sun and our broiling future beneath it. But yeah, it's all tied together by the face theme. And at some point along the way, I decided that it would be fun to break up the set at certain points by performing one of my instrumental compositions from my album Trips for Piano. This gives the audience a little extra reflective space and the chance to take another kind of journey for a few minutes until the art and words return.
Aha, so that's how Trips for Piano evolved.
Yeah, absolutely. I started first in life creatively as a pianist. When I was 4, we inherited an old anonymous upright piano from a relative that had passed. And as soon as it was in the house, I climbed right up there and started vibrating sound waves. And of course, I wasn't very good at first, but what I did have was a remarkable ear and an intense instinct for music. So for a number of years, I was self-taught until I finally got lessons, and it led to a bachelor's degree in music composition and classical piano performance, which I did at Penn State. And by the end of that degree, even though I was totally unleashed and unlocked as an artist, I was also physically burned out because I didn't know about pacing myself and work-life balance. So I actually stepped away from music for almost 17 years.
Wow.
Didn't touch a key. And then in the meantime, I had discovered teaching, and I did some traveling, and I, spent a number of years being an English teacher, which I still am. English is a second language. But as that kind of started to stabilize my life, and I started to feel like the pull of the fine arts again, I began drawing and writing, and that led to that stage show. And then, finally, to get back to the root of your question, that's when I had the idea of adding in the music. Because you have this real-time experience unfolding for people, maybe we could add an extra layer. So I tried it. Oh, man, it took the show to new heights.
Awesome.
And eventually I generated enough music for a standalone album.
Fabulous, fabulous. And dear listeners, we will hear some tracks from that album
Indeed.
very soon. But let's talk a little bit more. Martin, what other music are you interested in? What other bands or sounds inspire you? Anything local or contemporary or from the past?
Yeah, I love that question. As a listener, I'm way more eclectic than I am as a composer. I'd say I'd listen to all kinds of music from all over the world, different styles, different time periods. But then when I compose, I write for one specific instrument and a style that I've developed, which is in part influenced by all that stuff.
Sure.
So if I had to start early, like with my parents, seeing those records spin on the turntable, that would have been Bach, the Beatles, George Harrison solo stuff, Keith Jarrett, Earl Garner. And then in middle school, I got into new wave, like early U2, The Simple Minds, The Cure. When I got into my teenage years, I discovered punk rock and hardcore. And the Dead Kennedys, Dead Milkmen, DRI, Minor Threat, early Napalm Death, any of that crazy stuff. I actually got to meet Jello Biafra in high school. That was pretty cool, from the Dead Kennedys.
Cool.
And then I'd say college and beyond, that's where it really starts to get eclectic. In terms of classical music, I love Steve Reich, Gustav Mahler, Charles Ives. I don't know if anybody's heard Conlon Nancarrow. He was a guy in the 20th century who did these crazy studies for player piano that are these wild, unplayable pieces that it's before music sequencing. So he kind of did it like mechanically.
Oh, we'll look that up.
And then, just lots of bands, the Posies, the Orb, Brian Jonestown Massacre, Tame Impala.
Good stuff.
Lil Peep. Pretty much you name
Pretty
it, I can get into it if it's good at what it's trying to do.
Yeah, very eclectic mix. We'll definitely hear some of a sampling from some of your tastes very soon as well. But I'm curious, do you have any... So during the pandemic, we've been lamenting the loss of live music.
Yeah.
And so a lot of people have been able to focus on and reflect back on all those special moments of seeing live music. So do you have any favorite venues from pre-pandemic times or a performance that was particularly cool for you? And second part of this question, do you have a dream venue which you would like to perform in?
Yeah. I was fortunate enough over the pandemic to be able to keep doing things online, which is, of course, not quite the same as being in a live space. But toward the end of the pandemic, I actually, this was in September of 2021, I did get to perform at the Delaplane Arts Center in Frederick, Maryland.
Cool.
And I think up to that point, that was my most centered, joyful, and virtuosic performance. I just think that it's probably because I'd been away from the physical space for so long, and also because Frederick was the place that I was when I started the Face Zone without the music, right?
Okay.
And so by the time I returned with the full vision, it was kind of like a homecoming, so that felt really good.
Nice. Full circle there for you.
And then since the pandemic, I've has kind of ended this spring. I was at the Athenaeum in Alexandria. Busboys and Poets in Arlington featured me, and I did a set at the Woolly Mammoth Theater in D.C.
Awesome.
And I think that one was another kind of benchmark moment for me. I really felt like with that one, I turned a corner with just the kind of the heights that I reached with the delivery and fluency. And it was just such a nice space, too.
Yeah.
They even had an American Sign Language interpreter,
Awesome.
which I didn't get to look at while I was performing, but I had to wonder how he signed the word insomniatically or some of my made up phrases like blubbersome lozenge snarfer.
Oh,
like what kind
boy.
of arm kung fu did he have to do to like communicate that? But anyway, as far as a dream venue, honestly, almost any venue is a dream venue for me, as long as there's, you know, a space with electricity and people. I feel elated and blessed to share my art. So I call them deathbed moments.
Ah, I see. I see. Well, do you have any favorite local bands or artists that you want to give a shout out to or that you're excited about, you're looking forward to seeing live?
Well, one of the bands we're going to sample that I liked was a band from the past. It was from the Arlington area. We'll get more into that. In terms of right now, there's a local bluegrass singer and classical composer named Neil Lerner, and he and I are actually going to share a show together at the Athenaeum in Alexandria. I'll be returning there, and that'll be on Saturday, November 12th at 1 p.m. And I'll be doing, of course, my spoken word with projected art from the Face Zone and including some new material for the piano. And he's going to be premiering a kind of a music theater type drama with live musicians that he's just recently composed. So it should be pretty cool.
That sounds great. That sounds amazing. I will post that information on my Musical Remedies with the Night Nurse Facebook page. And
Nice.
dear listeners, you can check it out if you're interested and go see Martin and Neil perform. So where can listeners find your trips for piano?
Yeah, the easiest way is to go to tripsforpiano.com. That's the word for, not the number for. Yeah, tripsforpiano.com. There's lots of content on there. There's also a direct link to all the major streaming services. There's even a way to get it on CD if you're old school like me and love physical media in your hand. So that would be the best avenue. And I guess if anybody was interested in the art and the spoken word chunk of the show, they could go to thefacezone.com and check out that part of my universe.
Cool. So have you, I love asking all of my guests about what kind of weird idiosyncrasies they've developed during the pandemic. Any hobbies or quirks or special insights that you've gained on humanity or yourself?
Definitely. I actually, this is one of the very short poems that's from my most recent set from the Face Zone that kind of encapsulates one of the major things I learned over the pandemic.
Oh, okay.
So we're gonna
Lay it
try
on
this.
us. Lay it on us.
All right, so this piece is called Screen Locked. And if you could picture the art for this, just picture like a laptop computer and it's on, and in the screen there's like a Zoom meeting, like you got that banner and all the controls. But inside of it is just sort of this blue, kind of burned out, haggard face, and there's like kind of prison bars over the screen.
Yeah.
And it's called Screen Locked. Here we go. Before COVID-19, we were in an awful hurry to digitize every relationship. Texts replaced talking, kids faced a computer more than their teacher, and love was reduced to an algorithm. After months in quarantine, we're burned out blue from more screen light than sun, demoralized by login errors and connection failures, alienated by a grid of familiar faces we can see but not touch. Pay attention to these feelings. Sit with them. Let it all sink in. Because now is our century's chance to rethink this virtual wish come true.
Ah, thank you, Marty. Ah, that's a good one.
And on a lighter note, I also got back into horror movies.
Oh.
I was a horror movie junkie. I was away from it for as long as I
That-
was away from the piano and the pandemic and all that time in the house. Kind of started watching and collecting again.
Just going on the light side with some dark horror.
Well, that's it. I guess that's some insight into me, right? Like my lightness is somebody else's darkness.
Right. Do you have a particular favorite film that you've been getting into?
Oh wow. Well, I can give you my top three horror films are pretty mainstream. I would say, or I did The Exorcist, The Thing, the John Carpenter version, Phantasm, the first one, and the first Evil Dead. But I but I
Oh,
but I like, man, you just like, that's a whole nother show, man. I could
yeah,
I could do a
yeah.
podcast about obscure and underground horror, and don't get me started.
I like this idea. Maybe you're inspiring me to do some kind of horror movie themed cult classic for the month of October, maybe.
Amazing
Yeah.
soundtracks,
Yes.
especially from like those like 70s and 80s Italian horrors,
Oh,
like bands like
yes.
the Goblins,
Yes, yes.
and
Everything from Suspiria. Right, right.
yeah,
The new one and the old one with Tom York doing the new
that's right, yeah, yeah.
soundtrack for the new Suspiria. We do have a program here on Takoma Radio, Music Matinee, which is on Thursdays, I believe at 5 to 6 p.m. And the programmer plays music from films. So I bet he has something cooking up for along those lines. So we'll
Yeah,
see. We'll
that's
see.
a
Stay
cool
tuned.
idea.
Stay tuned, dear listeners. So, Martin, let's hear a few tracks from Trips for Piano. What would you like to start with? I know we have 3 selected.
Yeah, I think maybe the first one to start with could be the opening track off of the album, which is called Prism. And I would describe this one as a passionate meditation on the bright and dark moments that make our existence. A sonic vignette on the shifting light of this shifting life. So get ready for a trip of colors and moods.
Musical Remedies with the Night Nurse on your community radio, Takoma Radio. Martin Graff is in the studio with the Night Nurse tonight. Martin, please tell listeners what they just heard and what they're going to hear next.
Yeah, what you just heard was a piece called Prism, Shifting Light in This Shifting Life from my album Trips for Piano. That's the opening track. And the one we're going to hear next is a bit of a darker piece, but one that I really love. And it's called After. And this one I describe as a deep lament on the dark and passionate longing we feel when some cherished light is faded from our lives, like a soul to the sky. So this one is a reflection on loss.
Your community radio, Takoma Radio. And this is Musical Remedies. And Martin Graff, tell us what we just heard and what we're about to hear.
We just finished with a piece called After, A Soul to the Sky. It's from my album Trips for Piano. That was a piece kind of reflecting on loss. And for the last piece I'm going to share with you guys tonight, I picked something, the bright, sunny destination. This one is called Sativa, a verdant portal, and I would describe this one as an atmospheric metaphor of ethereal escape from the strenuous grind of everyday life. So think of this as a sonic respite where tension releases and weights lift away.
All right, enjoy. Well, Martin, thank you so much for joining me tonight. Dear listeners, this has been a great conversation with Martin Graff. He shared some of his musical remedies with you tonight. And Martin, tell us again about how our listeners can find your music and where they can see you play live again.
Yeah, thanks for asking. So you can check out more of what I do at tripsforpiano.com. Or if you'd like to see the spoken word and art that goes along with my show, you can go to thefacezone.com. And I'll be performing next on November 12th. That's a Saturday at 1 p.m. at the Athenaeum in Alexandria, Virginia. I'll be splitting a show with local composer Neil Lerner.
Wonderful. Martin, once again, thank you for joining me. Dear listeners, I will post that information on my Musical Remedies with the Night Nurse Facebook page for you to check it out if you are so inclined.
94.3 FM, Takoma Radio.org. You know you should tune in. Takoma Radio.org. WOWDLP 94.3 90